хвилі овація Петр Татарицький.
Здравствуйте, уважаемые дамы.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you from Moscow and also cordially welcome you to the Great Hall of the International Multimedia Press Center of the Russiya Segodnya Media Group. We are about to start the 12th International Scientific Conference, the Zinoviev Readings. Here we will be mentioning the name of Zinoviev, his ideas, his words that overcome time and space. A year ago, Vladimir Putin, President of the Russian Federation, signed a special decree to celebrate the centenary of Alexander Alexandrovich Zinoviev. For the first time in the history of Russia, the philosopher's centenary or anniversary is celebrated at a high state level. On October the 29th this year, President Putin of the Russian Federation sent a special greeting to the participants in the gala evening held at the Pillar Hall of the Unions, devoted once again to the centenary of Vladimir Zinoviev, who was a thinker, a philosopher, a founder of the new line in the global literature, and a true citizen and patriot of his country. You remember the words by Yevgeny Yevtushenko, the Russian poet. Let God keep blessing you, and let God make it so that your wife keeps loving you, and we will see this woman on the stage pretty soon. The spouse of Alexander Zinoviev is still in love with him, and their destiny was being together, and the country kicked them out first, but he could not stay there in another country. He returned to Russia, and today his ideas are more and more relevant. During the Valdai Discussion Club meetings, President Putin quoted Alexander Zinoviev, the Russian philosopher, and his ideas on the policy of the West and the Western trends are just as relevant today. This hall have seen many events that influenced the destiny of our country. They are associated with the greatness of history, culture, and the strength of the spirit of the Russian people. And we will say it many times today, and I hope you will support our motto today. Alexander Zinoviev, the great Russian thinker. For the solemn opening ceremony of the 12th International Scientific Conference, the Zinoviev Readings, we invite to the stage the members of the organizing committee for the preparation and holding of events dedicated to the centenary of Alexander Zinoviev, President of Alexander Zinoviev Biographical Institute, Olga Zinovieva. Olga Zinovieva, the floor is yours. Dear friends, dear faithful comrades, dear country of mine that did it on time to pay tribute to this amazing person in my life, to a great writer, a fabulous philosopher, the ad hoc thinker, the person who was the major impact in my life, and he continues to be influencing my life even today. Alexander Zinoviev, my love, my joy, my happiness. We shared grief and exile together, our common children and our fighting together. When we talk about Zinoviev today, it's fairly easy for those who never met him, but I was able to be with him from October the 1st, 1965 to October the 1st, 2021, when our president signed that decree. And that is not a coincidence. That was the first gift of our president to my dear husband. And this is really a huge event. That was not understood by our Institute of Philosophy. Was it hatred or envy? It's their problem, not mine. When we saw each other with Alexander, we immediately fell in love. 23 years of age difference is not much at all. We had enough time to get together and make decisions on the issues that Alexander Zinoviev was considering. This is still the ideal brain capable of providence. He wasn't some kind of visionary, but he was able to predict the future events based on minute details, and he predicted some of those really sad changes in the life of our country. Thankfully, our country is back, and we are overcoming the attacks and the aggression from the collective West. It's time for us to start thinking about the collective East and the collective Southeast. We do have this chance now. Now there's this amazing project entitled the BRICS Legends. And Purnima Anand, president of the BRICS Forum, she's with us today. She will give us more details about that. But it's not a coincidence. It's all coming together in this one space. We're talking about time, place, and people. And again, we are here at the Russiya Segodnya Multimedia Press Center. This is where we started, thanks to Dmitry Kiselev. And back then, the Zinoviev Club was established. We've been working for 14 years. Starting from 2014. We keep working. We have time to help one another, to help about our relatives and friends. We plan recommendations, efficient recommendations to the country around us for the just image of our motherland. We only had one motherland at all times, for me and for Alexander Zinoviev, when Zinoviev fought in the skies of Western Europe, fighting for our country. When he was in exile, when he got back, he kept saying that our country has to be protected from the demons that multiplied abroad. And he got back on the 30th of June, 1999, and he said openly that the attack of the NATO troops against Yugoslavia was a crime against humanity and justice, against the sovereignty of the state, which is now turning into a bad habit. The Western countries that are part of NATO, the Western countries that are unable to think for themselves, or maybe they can, but they cannot afford freeing themselves from the yoke of Washington, and they do everything against their own people. And our country, our leadership, keep thinking about ourselves. We have to support our president. We have a genius of the president, and we have some losses. We did not hear the Zinoviev's predictions on time. It's better late than never, and now we're catching up. I'm really happy that we are all here together in this room. I'm thankful to all of you who came, and I expect from the leadership of our country, when they open the museum of Zinoviev devoted to the scientific and literary publications of Alexander Zinoviev. He was a thinker, a sociologist, a scholar, and that museum will be established starting from this moment on. Thank you for listening to me, and now the floor is yours. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Director General of the International Russiya Segodnya Media Group, Dmitry Kiselev. Olga Zinovieva, dear guests, it's a real pleasure for me to be here. We've been together since 2014 with the Zinoviev Club. That decision to set up the Zinoviev Club under the agency was one of my first decisions when I became the Director General, and never regretted that. And we were able to bring Zinoviev back into today's thinking. And remember when President, in one of his best speeches, how he quoted Alexander Zinoviev. I wonder if it happened without the Zinoviev Club, but at least that would be less of a possibility. Olga Zinovieva and myself did a lot to promote Zinoviev's ideas in the 21st century, and there is demand for Zinoviev's ideas. He is relevant. He is up to today's challenges, and we do need him and his ideas today. I wish the Zinoviev Club productive work, a great atmosphere here on the premises of Russiya Segodnya. And you are always welcome. Thank you. Chairperson of the organizing committee to prepare the events devoted to the centenary of Alexander Zinoviev, Minister of Science and Higher Education of the Russian Federation, Valery Falkov. Olga Zinovieva, dear friends, participants in our international conference, congratulations on the beginning of this important event. Also, let me say that every month, every week this year, we organize a number of events attracting attention to the works of Alexander Zinoviev. The 100th anniversary, the centenary, is an important date. Since the beginning of the year, we planned our events in such a way that this plan is not just a formal document, but we keep hearing the name of Alexander Zinoviev for this entire year. And most importantly, we need the young people of Russia to know and remember this name. Distinguished colleagues, the works of this great Russian thinker and poet, a sociologist. He was a multifaceted person indeed. He lived a bright and interesting life, unique life. Most of us in this auditorium today know his works quite well, but our main job is to introduce our young people to the works of Alexander Zinoviev, because the ideas of great thinkers need to keep on living in the hearts and minds of later generations. That's a great task that we have for ourselves. And let me specifically thank those university presidents and professors who kept spending time this year to introduce our younger generation to the works of Alexander Zinoviev. Dear friends and dear Olga Zinovieva, congratulations once again. Let me remind you in conclusion what we recently agreed on with Olga Zinovieva. The 100th anniversary is a centenary, but every next year we have to be just as active in terms of different events, but also we need to keep the bar high as we attract the youth and the general public to the ideas of Alexander Zinoviev. And when people pass away, a long time after that happens, those great individuals are recognized as geniuses. Congratulations once again on this great event, but please stay on the stage for successfully leading the organizing committee and for your personal contribution to these celebration events. You are awarded with this Jubilee Medal dedicated to the centenary of Alexander Zinoviev. And you get the medal and Alexander Zinoviev's sculpture by Vladimir Kuruchkin.
The anniversary medal has been awarded for the special merits in popularizing the intellectual and creative legacy of Mr. Zinoviev, standing up for the moral baselines and principles followed by Mr. Zinoviev. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, on the birthday of Alexander Zinoviev, October 29th, the Congress Hall hosted a gala concert and a party dedicated to that event. One of the initiators, one of those who masterminded that event, along with the Communist Party of the Russian Federation and Biographic Institute of Zinoviev, was Just Russia Socialist Party, called for truth. From the very beginning, a keynote speech was delivered by the leader of the party, head of Just Russia faction in the State Duma of the Russian Federation, Mr. Mironov. Over to you. My dear Olga, friends and colleagues, this is with great pleasure that I'm standing here, and from the very outset I'd like to apologize. Unfortunately, I will make my pitch and I will have to excuse myself because my work necessitates my presence in the State Duma. But bear in mind that these are the 12th Zinoviev Readings. I've prepared a scientific input, and with your permission, let me spell it out. Alexander Zinoviev is an outstanding contemporary of ours. He was a large-scale individual, something similar to the antique philosophers of the Renaissance time, a major scientist, a philosopher, an outstanding social science, a talented artist, a war veteran, and actually these things were brought together in one person who had almost a cosmic talent. It's very difficult to use the ordinary template to measure him. He was short of being standards, and therefore let me speak in not in formal terms. He's not with us, but still I'm tempted to hold dialogue with him. This reiterates the fact as how important political discourse were pertinent to him. This is one thing. He's a hallmark person, a very symbolic figure. And studying his history, his biography, we try to study better the history of Russia, the love for the motherland. This is what permeates his fate and destiny. I drew attention to the fact that Mr. Zinoviev saw some adverse signs in the structure of the Soviet Union when it was in its pinnacle. Then he rejected Gorbachev's perestroika and full of destruction 1990s. Zinoviev anticipated that Russia is awaiting lots of hardships. It is not accidental that philosophy acquires a lot of importance and significance in the breaking points of history. This is especially relevant today when a hybrid war is being staged by the collective West against ours. We need not military warfare, but intellectual practices and cyber warfare in order to repel and reject the attempts to undermine the basics of the country by means of a psychological war. Today's tragic events show, obviously, that Russia is not just a state, but this is a civilization. A civilization is different from just a state by the fact that it acts as a magnet for the people who are living in other nations, but who share the same culture and the same language. This is what we see today. Our civilization is alive, and this serves as the basics for, or as a foundation for, the multipolar world, the shift to which we are observing today. Alexander Zinoviev has always acted as a defender, as a protector of a multipolar world. He was afraid of Russia losing its historic identity, becoming part of a human anthill, just like the Western colonialists wanted it to be. With deep satisfaction, I may note that it is becoming in the Russian society to understand that state sovereignty and civilization identity become a norm. We put forward our strategic goals and we develop our ways to attain them. Zinoviev's anniversary is another reason for us to highlight certain features that make Russia a unique civilization which is not dominated by the historic time. Number one, seemingly, we share with the West the same values as Enlightenment, Christianity, and others, but it is in 1154 a great schism took place, breaking the Western and the Eastern Christianity. Two worlds emerged. Russia has always denied rationalist attitude towards people. It is not based on the calculation, because the inner world of a man is much more diverse and much richer. Russia is standing up for mutual recognition, mutual respect between the people, spiritual, religious, and others. And this differs us from the Western aspiration to assimilate or to suppress anything alien, what we see in case of the Ukrainian crisis with its outstanding Russophobic sentiment. The Russian Federation civilization has such signs as collectivism, as mutual assistance, and the feel for social justice. Collection, multiplication of the Russian nation. This is what our nation has to work for. The healthcare, education, and modern infrastructure, convenient living conditions for the peoples of Russia have to serve to that end. For they dissent with that. We are being hated in the West. Zinoviev realized that the West creates its own unipolar world, which serves its own needs, as a kind of a neocolonial model, which totally denies equality and independent choice of their own historic way for other nations and peoples. Zinoviev, as a philosopher, made a conclusion that there has never been place in that picture of the world for Russia. This explains the continuous and repetitive attempts by the West to destroy Russia. The Western civilizations, based on the double-speak, on the double standards, hatred and greediness. Once again, it puts the world on the edge of the nuclear apocalypse. We could have made certain lessons out of 2 world wars, but the expansionist Western culture is still here on the table. Instead of trade, we see cannons. Instead of tolerance, we see the Nazi philosophy of hatred, the war which is being brought by the NATO and by the United States to the Balkans had a spillover effect onto us. One of the days, U.S. Congressman James Ruskin, with no doubt, said, I quote, "Russia, that's a Christian Orthodox country which professes traditional values. This is why it has to be destroyed, regardless of whatever cost, whatever the price the United States has to pay for that." End quote. This is actually what Zinoviev warned us when he said that they want to strike us out of the history as a civilization, as a people, as a state, as a civilization. And today, these attempts are going on. Mr. Zinoviev, being a war veteran, saw the aggressiveness of the West, and he realized that the attempts of the West to make Russia subordinate to its will has to be repelled and rejected by the ideological shield. Mr. Zinoviev was against the official Soviet ideology, but at the same time he recognized the advantages of the Soviet system. So it means that he was not limited to the criticism. The very essence of the literature and books written by Zinoviev is to propose a free option, a free choice to the people. He stood on these positions in order to assess other nations. My party, the Socialist Party of Russia, values very much his legacy. For instance, his understanding of the society as a super society, which sees the interference of the social technologies when unwanted social systems are being destroyed. As is known, Mr. Zinoviev was not the advocate of socialism, but he was advocate of the essence of socialism. He was not lecturing, but he rather started the social systems. Communism as a reality, one of the rare books which help us to understand what society existed until 1991 and what legacy we inherited in the 21st century. He doesn't beautify the Soviet structure, but there is no blasphemy there as well. Despite the defeat in the Cold War, the former Soviet Union outperforms the Western culture. Mr. Zinoviev says that it was very logical socialism, as nothing more meets the very spirit of the Russian people. In early 1990s, philosopher Zinoviev was one of the few those who rejected the attempts made by the Western civilization to inflict damage to the Russian identity. He realized that while living in the breaking moment of history, he did his utmost in order to help us to get some vision of the future. Not by accident, some of his books were published in the series of History of the 20th Century, Prospects and Predictions. Mr. Zinoviev, in his political and literature work, tried to remain independent and to follow unbiased models consistently, step by step, brick by brick. He proved that Russia has its own historical way to follow. He confirmed the specific model of the Russian socialist structure. In one of his essays, he said that Russia has to outwit the West to show our ideological supremacy. My party totally shares the views of Zinoviev. Amid the hybrid war waged against Russia, Russia has to resist and survive. The party uses the multifaceted legacy of Zinoviev, using that to make a very brief motto: Russia will always be. Thank you so much. I'm confident that this is how it will come true. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, our today's forum received a special welcome address from the government to the participants in the 12th Scientific Conference Zinoviev Readings. Wholeheartedly let me welcome the participants in the 12th Scientific Zinoviev Readings Conference. The holding of readings has become a hallmark event for the cultural and spiritual life of Russia. And still, today's forum is something special because it's dedicated to the centenary since the birth of the great philosopher of Russia. For the first time in the history, following the order of President Putin, this anniversary is celebrated at the governmental level, which means that his value, the value of his legacy, is totally priceless, and has an impact both on Russia and abroad. Social studies, political science, fiction literature. This is the not full list of his contributions. His name is among the greatest names of the philosophers of the 20th century. He created the literature genre which is called sociological novels. He is the creator of a new ethical teaching. There are few people in the history who could achieve so much in various areas. These impressive achievements are underlined not just by his talent, but the fact that he kept and maintained close ties with the Russian people. He was the real patriot of Russia. Being a combat pilot, he protected his motherland during the World War II and in the next years, despite ups and downs of his fate, despite the attempts of the West to intimidate him or to make him turn to their side. Still, his works were permitted by love for the motherland. He valued very much the Russian identity, the Russian civilization, and these ideas are demanded as never before. He is one of the most comprehensive philosophers, one of the sharpest critics of the West. His statements regarding the aspiration of the West for hegemony and the tendency for Russophobic sentiments look like prophecies. What he predicted 20, 30 years ago sound as if these things were written today. And it is not obeying to the will of time. I wish to the participants of the conference in their work. Chair of the Federal Council of the Russian Federation, Ms. Matviyenko. And now, ladies and gentlemen, friends, comrades, dear friends, let us proceed with the award ceremony. Olga, will you please host that ceremony along with the manifestation or personification of Mr. Zinoviev next to his sculpture, his bust, his monument? An anniversary medal since the centenary of Zinoviev, his portrait made in marble by Kuruchkin is awarded to Dmitry Kiselev. Our congratulations and thank you so much. Furnimaman from India. Welcome to the stage. Our congratulations. Mr. Genituski Marazzani Visconti from Italy. Ms. Genituski Marazzani Visconti, welcome to the stage. Our congratulations. Thank you so much. Those who are not in that room, the award will be given later on. Sergei Baburin. We'll give that award a bit later. Nikolai Bukhteyev. Welcome to the stage. Congratulations, David Johadze. Alexei Dyakonov. Irina Ilyina, welcome to the stage. Congratulations. Alexei Kozyrev. Sergei Kolomytsev. Andrei Kondrashev. Natalia Koroleva. Welcome to the stage. Vladimir Kurochkin.
Welcome, Maestro. He is the author of that sculpture bust of Alexander Zinoviev. Thank you once again. Next is Maxim Lavrentiev, Yuri Naumov, Leonid Polyakov, Vladimir Semyonov, Alexander Skvortsov, Natalia Tugarinova, Pavel Fokin, congratulations. Lyubov Tsoi, welcome to the stage. Thank you and congratulations. Once again, Zinoviev's sculpture bust by Vladimir Kurochkin, Slobodan Despot, Serbia and Switzerland. Dmitry Dokoshko, France. Congratulations, Elvira Balandina. Welcome to the stage. Kirill Borisov, Iskander Valitov, welcome. Konstantin Volkov, Olga Koleva, Romuald Krylov-Yotto, Vladimir Lepechin, Valery Lukov, post-mortem. Congratulations and thank you. Sergei Markov. Oleg Nazarov. Oleg Nechiporenko. This person knew Alexander Zinoviev longer than anyone else in this room. If you don't mind, let me tell you a few words about Alexander Zinoviev, whom I knew 70 years ago. Over that period of 70 years and even more, we kept crossing each other's paths, and this was a fateful process of meeting and then not being in touch and then meeting again. Thank you and congratulations. Alexei Pankin is next. Congratulations. Svetlana Popova. Yuri Solodukhin. Yelena Chepurnych. Anatoly Chernyaev. Ladies and gentlemen, we have given the award to those people who helped us organize the Alexander Zinoviev year. Many of them did a lot to preserve his ideas and his legacy. They're all the part of that Zinoviev anthill. They are an integral part of Zinoviev's intellectual and cultural tradition to live and think as Russians do. All right, thank you for being part of this award ceremony. Now we will start the readings per se, and we have our plans of presenters. We need to start our main program, and today it's particularly important to promote Russian ideas, the Russian way of thinking. But we will start the Zinoviev readings by the words of Alexander Zinoviev himself, as quoted from this book by Zinoviev. Live. Keep living since you were born. Keep living no matter what. If you were born a cockroach, live as a cockroach. If you were born a rat, live like a rat. If you were born as an eagle, live like an eagle. Your time will come and you will disappear, but as long as you live, keep living. This is what I say to myself. Live and keep living. And for that, if you do that, you will be awarded for any of your good features. When you are born, you are destined for sin and suffering, but when you die, you are purified of your sin and suffering. Just be patient, and your all repenting death will come. But so far, keep living. Live. Alexander Zinoviev, the great Russian thinker. Now, let me invite to the stage a special person. It's a great lady. She is well known all over the world. She is president of International BRICS Forum, Ms. Purnima Anand. She's been working with civil societies of the BRICS countries, implementing youth, culture, humanitarian projects in the interests of our union, representing the Indian political tradition, which for 75 years has been the part of this social fabric of the most populated democracy of the world. We are willing to hear your speech. A week ago, you arrived here in Delhi, from Delhi, but you visited the city of Kostroma, the birthplace of Alexander Zinoviev. You have conducted dozens of meetings and interviews. The floor is yours.
Namaste from India, honorable dignitaries present here, honorable international guests, Madam Olga Alexandra Zinovieva. It is my honor and pleasure to be present in this honorable, very important 100th celebration of Alexander Zinoviev. This is really a historic moment that when world is changing so fast and Russia-Ukraine crisis is observed by whole world, we are celebrating 100th year of Alexander Zinoviev. He was an outstanding person. His ideology was completely unique, and he did not compromise with his ideology with the current world. Because right is right, truth is truth, fact is fact, and he proved it during his life. He suffered a lot with his family, and Madam Olga, she transferred her life to his vision, to his work. That is really very important, which impressed me very much during my visit, during my studies about Alexander Zinoviev. I feel that this strong, stable ideas make us strong, and it makes our country strong. I remember that after Second World War, every home of Russia lost their men in the war. And that time, Russian women took the initiative, and they divert that war time to glorious USSR. So that is the beauty of women dedication. And Olga Zinovieva's whole life worked for that dedication and that purity for his friend, his husband, and her colleague. So that is really a wonderful example of our lives. So this is really important that we met during this visit many dignitaries who knows Alexander Zinoviev, who are impressed by his work. I got opportunity to visit Kostroma, his native place, and I understand why he was so strong and vibrant and stable, because he was having energy and vibration of Olga River. And I want to connect that Olga and Ganga, these are the oldest civilization of the earth. And I want to pursue my work with Olga Zinoviev to continue work between Volga and Ganga. So I hope our dedicated work will benefit the humanity. And currently I came here especially to initiate project with the Zinoviev Society to initiate program for the BRICS legends. And I find that Alexander Zinoviev work is remarkable and outstanding. We need to transfer his ideology to next generation. This is responsibility of our time. And BRICS is important, and why it is relevant to add Alexander Zinoviev with BRICS. Because BRICS is an important ideology in current world. It is not competition, it is a cooperation between humanity. It is a trust between human to human. And people to people dialogue is very important. This is the ideology of Alexander Zinoviev, where he never compromised during his life. So that is the common point where I feel Alexander Zinoviev is the real legend for the BRICS community work, and to transform his ideology to next generation. And we want to carry forward his thinkings to the BRICS community and the countries where people love Russia, people love Russian people understand Russian civilization. So this is very important that current world should know Russia. Unfortunately, we are meeting in current time where Russian phobia is created by the Western world, which is not right. World need to be understand Russia, need to be listened by the Western organization and Eastern organization, because this is the time when Western world is declining and Eastern world is coming up. And BRICS countries are emerging economies, and they are showcasing political and economic stability. So this is the place where we can go ahead and we can save the civilizations, because BRICS countries is the most ancient civilizations. So civilization never dies. You cannot finish civilization. So humanity will always survive, and good humans will always come. And once again, I will not take much time because other speakers are here. But one thing is very important, that we should love each other, we should understand each other, we should trust each other, then we can save the humanity. Thank you very much.
Благодарим вас.
Thank you. And now let me invite to the stage another person whom we know very well. He is a unique statesman. He has spent many years in the Russian politics, literally more than 30 years. He was one of the founders of Russian federalism. He used to work as chairperson of the Constitutional Legislation Committee of the Federation Council of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation. He used to be head of the Moscow City Duma or Parliament, and today he is the president of Moscow's Chamber of Industry and Trade, and he's been a friend of the Zinoviev Club, of the Russiya Segodnya International Media Group. He is a full-scale member of our Zinoviev Anthill, and I mean Vladimir Platonov. Welcome to the stage, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for these sweet memories. And now, getting prepared for that meeting, I remembered one very interesting episode in my life. I was lucky enough, I was introduced to a well-known Chilean philosopher who is the founder of moral physics, the Laus. His books are translated into Russian. They are in the list of 100 authors that are recommended for the Russian readers, and in Chile, we awarded him with the Vavilov Prize. Present were the officials from Chile, and they were very much surprised that Russia pays so much attention to the philosopher. And at the very end of that event, one of these officials asked me, is it long that he arrived to Chile? And he said that I never left it. This is an example of a person who serves his motherland, who loves his motherland. And the same is true as Alexander Zinoviev. He had to leave Russia, but he went on serving for the interest of his motherland. This is most important. Like Michael Zadornov used to say that I distinguish the state and the motherland. Zinoviev served to his motherland. He tried to improve our state. Remembering those sires, this phrase that there are no prophets in your own country, it reminds me that Zinoviev was a prophet for Russia, whose prophecies come true. This is what we see. And there is a whole school of heirs to Zinoviev, of his apprentices. This is why today we have the separation of powers and real multi-party system, and a whole range of civil society institutions are being set up, which are very helpful in developing right decisions for the state. I'm confident that Zinoviev Readings would be ranked as high as Primakov Readings. Zinoviev brought together so many diverse people. They were diverse in their statements, in their views, and everyone could spell out, and then these ideas would be put on record, and then it would serve as the foundation for the development of the state. Let me congratulate all of us on that anniversary. I'm confident that we have to make sure that the people who express their views would get a response, a feedback, not in 100 years from now, but much earlier. Mobilization is not a new phenomenon, but this is so fast in the economy, in the market economy, that the state was not deaf to the appeals from the businessmen, starting from the decision to postpone the conscription by 1 month and subsequent decisions. I'm confident that the books by Zinoviev would be considered in the future. I wish all of us to be success in that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, all over the world, the interest to Zinoviev is on the rise. One of the centers studying the legacy of the great philosopher is the People's Republic of China. The State Naval University of Dalian set up Zinoviev Research Center, which works for several years. In the framework of the 25th research project, Alexander Zinoviev Russian Confucius has been headed by Van Hiking. Please watch the screen. We got a video message.
We are Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, good day. Добрый день. I'm very proud of make a video speech during Alexander Zinoviev's 100th birthday. This is my pride. Professor Alexander Zinoviev сейчас где? Now he is in the heaven. We will imagine what's the situation now. I think a plenty of beautiful angels surround him, enjoy with him birthday party. Second, pray for his excellent philosophy and wisdom, benefits of all the world's writers, people's development. According to international situation at present now, I hope making the following points. In his book, talk about the fifth column. Fifth column now in the word bad habits, the word peace. Hurt, the word peace. I think we should collect a plenty of experience and punishment, also some lessons from his book, How Help Support Now the Situation International Development. I'm sure now all the passengers, all the attendants here think about this question. Second, Alexander Zinoviev's professor's philosophy, great philosophy idea. Now, exam, test, guarantee. What has happened now? The third, how we make a good development for Alexander Zinoviev's philosophy idea in the world. Now I'm in China. I'm a Chinese people. I organize my Chinese team in China, established Alexander Zinoviev Philosophy Center to spread his idea in China from my beginning. Finally, I want to speak what? Finally, I want to pray for Russian Federation. God bless all the writers in the world. Thank you. Спасибо.
Благодарим.
Thank you so much. Philosopher, enlightened Russian conservatives, one of the active members of the Zinoviev Club, author of the collection of articles on conservatives to the centenary of Alexander Zinoviev. This collection of essays was published, and today he is a professor and a researcher of the High School of Economics, member of the Presidential Council on the Development of Civil Society and Human Rights. Leonid Polyakov, welcome to the stage. At the time, Olga Mironova and Leonid Polyakov were the mates at the Faculty of Philosophy of the Moscow State University. Now, they go on working to preserve and popularize the legacy of Alexander Zinoviev. Over to you. Thank you so much for reminding us of those glorious years. That was a time when I was happy enough to learn a lot from Alexander Zinoviev, and I do think that these were the most informative years. Without his contribution to my fate, I will never be standing on that podium today. You know, we all were handed a journal, Historian, and my article there is called Paradoxical Zinoviev. Let me explain what this title means, because one thing is you say a paradoxical, but another thing is to understand the very paradox about him. What this paradox is about, let me tell you what it is about, what I think about that. Yesterday's concert in the convention palace impressed me very much. Brilliant Nicholas Bulaev Bashmet, the great violin player, lots of verses were quoted. And then I started thinking about the following. This well out of wit. I thought that once we were speaking about Zinoviev, and we remember his recipe to outwit the West, probably it would make sense to rephrase that as wit out of woe. I regularly read his book, which is called The Confession of the Dissenter. And Mr. Zinoviev writes about the first years of the 1920s and 30s when he was sleeping on a sack with potato between the toilet and the bathroom. And I will not speak more about the hardships that he had to live through, all those ups and downs. But let me mention one thing only. Alexander Zinoviev managed to transform the experience of biggest wow into an intellectual potential. The wow, the grief made him think. And this is why he wrote the following. Discovery, discovery, and discovery once again. So this is the conclusion that he made. This ability to think, which is pertinent not only to philosophers but of each of us, as far as we consider ourselves to be Homo sapiens, we're capable of thinking, reasonable people. This ability to think includes paradox, something next to habitual things, to our intelligence. And this is one of the traits of a genius, and Zinoviev was a genius, and therefore he thought in terms of paradoxes. For instance, his remarkable phrase, when he characterized himself, he said, "I'm a far-right conservative, but I'm on the outer flank of the progress." It can be remembered easily, but what it means, how can you be a reactionist and the advocate of progress? I understand it the following way. When Alexander Zinoviev tried to understand communism in his book, which is called The Yawning Heights, he acted as a reactionist. He stood on the utmost Marxist positions, but in terms of anti-communism, he was even more advanced. In 1967, he already was in 1991, but when the communism was defeated, when communist number one gave up these ideas, he became an anti-communist. And 20 years from that, his anti-communism turned into progressism, and today's renaissance of what we can call a communism only reiterates that. When he said, "I'm an utmost reactionist who is in advance guard of progress," has a lot of meaning. Zinoviev and his texts are full of such paradoxes. Second paradox. I'm a Homo Sos and Homo Sovieticus. That's why I love Soviet system and I hate it at the same time. How can you love and hate the same thing? And this is not a truism, which sounds like that there is one step which separates love and hatred. This is a norm for us because we swap love for hate and vice versa, but Zinoviev was capable of loving and hating at the same time and vice versa. It is a supreme art, but this is not an art, but this is the elevated capacity to live fully, to have at large. His novel Leave was quoted by Alexander Blok because he made that slogan, you have to combine love and hatred. And the last paradox, and there were lots of such paradoxes. I invite each of you to get familiar with his books and to define these paradoxes. This paradox sounds like that. All the worst qualities of communism are derived from its best traits. This is what he wrote in his Confession of Dissent. He said that probably was the first communist in the history he saw the evils of communism in its virtues. And this discovery made me despair of a cosmic scale. And therefore I deplored the whole future of the mankind. I can decipher it. I could explain why. The best traits of communism serve as an origin for its worst traits. This seed was planted for us to think on that, so that it could resonate in our hearts, because today we are entering a very interesting time. On the one hand, we understand it, that we managed to take a very long journey, and 100th anniversary of Zinoviev. This is a 100th anniversary since the Soviet Russia was established. I do not know whether Mr. Kiselev plans to celebrate that, but December 1922 is a very hallmark event, although the Soviet Union has collapsed. What this communism renaissance is about, what his warning, Zinoviev's warning, is about, that the worst traits originate from the best traits of the Soviet Union. I think that we have to think more of that. We are living in the world, and we have our Chinese guests sitting there. We are living in that world between capitalist West, which we understand very well, and between the communist China that we understand very well. The latest speech by President Xi at the Congress of the Communist Party of China is an excellent example of how the Chinese people, who, picking up the red banner that we, the Soviets, have dropped, are building communism on that planet. Zinoviev said that we have to outwit the West. Not just we have to outwit the West, but probably we have to try to comprehend the unique experience of China, building Chinese socialism, how to resist to the Western culture. I do believe that we still remember Zinoviev. Zinoviev is alive in our hearts, although he died 16 years ago. I like very much that message from China, where a colleague said that where Alexander Zinoviev is now, he is in the heaven. Despite the fact that he died 16 years ago, he's still with us, because he is a permanent intellectual challenge. He keeps our conscience awake, in consciousness awake. He prevents us from resting on laurels, from being complacent. The centenary of Zinoviev is the beginning of his millennium. His books, his essays are the best tools to outwit the West and to master the excellent Chinese experience of building socialism in one country. This is the very essence of Alexander Zinoviev and his works. And when I say that, we can say that it is the wheat out of woe. This is not because of me being a pessimist, but I see how our intelligence can convert sufferings into optimism, into bright future, just like Zinoviev and our country managed to go through lots of hardships, and today we are going through these hardships as well. If we can convert our grief and sorrow, which is in our everyday life, when our people are being killed, if we can convert that grief into wit, the ability to defeat the West intellectually, I think that Mr. Zinoviev, and I quote our Chinese comrade, would be happy in heaven.
Thank you. Bravo. In July this year, the 14th BRICS summit was organized, and on the eve of that summit, we learned about the unique humanitarian project devoted to keep intellectuals of the BRICS group. Of BRICS project is around the main representatives of philosophies of the countries that founded that association: Paulo Coelho, Alexander Zinoviev, Mahatma Gandhi, Confucius, and Nelson Mandela. By enriching the national legacy of ideas about human beings, each one of them set forth some ethical standards for the entire humanity and created criteria of studying the world of people and their relations. The mission of the project is forming the space of open dialogue of traditions, values, and meanings to deepen our understanding of what is the foundation of any civilization. What unites people through space and time makes a human being a human being. And in Brazil, this 2-month marathon that was planned, and here's our guest, Vicente Barrientos, head of the Ibero-American Institute.
Дамы и господа, здравствуйте. Olga Mironovna.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Olga Zinovieva, it's an honor to be here on the stage in your presence and in front of this distinguished audience. I don't want to repeat what was already said here when we discussed Alexander Zinoviev, a great thinker and philosopher. Brevity is the sister of talent, they say, and let me say once again that in Brazil and elsewhere there's enormous interest to the works by Alexander Zinoviev, and in other countries of Latin America we see his works translated into Portuguese and Spanish in the universities that focus on humanities. I hope that the implementation of this project, the Five Legend project, will help us promote the works of Alexander Zinoviev. I only hope that this cooperation in humanities will contribute to rapprochement between our countries. We hear a lot today about multipolar world, and this is exactly what we need: new horizons, new options for social, economic, and political development of our world and our countries. Thank you very much. Thank you. Next is Irina Ilyina. She is the head of the think tank under the Ministry of Science and Higher Education. They monitor technological development, scientific and technology policy of the country. Such think tanks consider items like ideological sovereignty of a country, topics aimed at strengthening philosophical and spiritual foundations of the Russian society. Irina Ilyina, the floor is yours. Good afternoon, colleagues. Dear Olga Zinovieva, it's an honor for me to be present at this event. It's a unique opportunity to get in touch with Alexander Zinoviev's works. I have a list of quotes based on his works, and let me read out one phrase. I want the people where I belong to survive as a historic entity. We have to survive as a historic entity in the field of culture and economy, and by preserving our values. The words by Alexander Zinoviev are like fresh air for us and the future generations. That's particularly important. Let me also remind you his words about the intellectuals, intelligentsia. The intelligentsia is that layer of the society that is able to preserve national ideas, that is capable of advancing and developing civilizations. This is what Alexander Zinoviev wrote about it. The intelligentsia is that fabric of the society that's really hard to grow. It's the easiest one to destroy. It's really hard to restore. You have to protect it all the time. To destroy it, it's enough to not guard it. You don't even have to attack it. During this year of Alexander centenary, the ideas that he left for us are particularly important. The intellectuals, the intelligentsia, are those who can keep on going. And I bow to you, Olga Zinovieva. You are a strong person, a strong woman who was his supporter and friend, and you were able to communicate and pass his ideas to us. There are many talented people. We don't always remember them, but we remember Alexander Zinoviev thanks to you. Our think tank deals with issues of implementing science and technology policy, but patriotism is also important. President Putin sets guidelines for us to follow patriots of our country who deserve our respect and who go beyond time. I once again thank you and Alexander Zinoviev for all your work. The Zinoviev Club of the Russiya Segodnya International Media Group and the organizing committee of the Zinoviev Readings keep getting video addresses. We got yet another one, and we will see it in a few seconds. A TV host, the expert of the State Duma and the Federal Assembly on CIS matters and affairs of the compatriots, Mr. Kulikov. Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues and friends. I welcome all of you here. First of all, let me congratulate all of us on this centenary of the great Russian thinker, philosopher, logician, writer, artist, and poet, Alexander Zinoviev. It is true, his logical and philosophical ideas were a major contribution to that sphere of human life which was always difficult for science. I mean, humanitarian, social, and humane matters. He focused on the structure of the society, of the entire humanity. He wanted to identify the laws that this society can follow. And he made a number of discoveries, but there is one which is particularly important and relevant. There are two philosophical and logical categories here that Alexander Zinoviev offered to all of us, and that he used to make his analysis. And when we talk about his predictions, that he made decades ago, and they were right on target. He did it because he was using those two philosophical categories. First of all, it's the category of super power, that kind of power which is beyond and outside the regulation mechanisms, beyond the regulatory framework, which is done arbitrarily. The kind of power which is not limited by law, culture, norms, and traditions. There is nothing that would regulate this kind of power. That's why Zinoviev called it superpower. And this power belonged to the supra-society. That's another category that Zinoviev studied. The supra-society consists of people who believe that they are beyond the state and law and other mechanisms that organize and co-organize the work of large societies. If we look at our life today from a broader point of view, terms that we use today, globalism, globalization, and hegemony, according to Zinoviev, this is what we mean by supra-society. He wrote about it 25 years ago, or even more. But this is something which is obvious today, something that we take for granted. But it's one thing when you can recognize the obvious. Another thing is how you deal with it. Zinoviev's logic and philosophy give us tools to work with it technically and politically. This is something that we see in our country. A few days ago, when President Putin spoke at the meeting of the Valdai Club, he quoted Alexander Zinoviev. If I recall it correctly, he said something like this, quoting Zinoviev, that the West cannot keep on living without mastering the entire resources of the planet. It is unable to reproduce without the riches of the entire planet, and all other residents of the planet, with the exception of this super society, all the other people living on the planet have to be deprived of these resources because of superpower of that super society. That seems like an obvious thing, but in conclusion, President said during that meeting at the Valdai Club that the revolutionary situation is there, and the elite can no longer proceed according to the previous ways, and the masses no longer want to continue as they did in the past. And when we emphasize again that that was the only way for the West to keep on prospering, and many countries and their leaders understand this now, and the societies of those countries especially countries who were ever colonized or that went through attempts to colonize it from the West. We don't want to surrender those resources to the Western society, and that would be the way to take this superpower away from them. When we understand that, we can keep on going in accordance with that understanding, politically, economically, and even militarily, if we need to. Zinoviev understood that, and he was able to foresee that. He armed us with tools to understand all of that and deal with it. Thank you for coming to this anniversary meeting. Congratulations once again on the centenary of Alexander Zinoviev, and wish all of you all the best. Sincerely yours, Dmitry Kolikov. Thank you, Dmitry. And moving on, Alexander Zinoviev was particularly close with Italy. He was the member of the Rome Academy of Sciences. He received the Tevere Literary Award. He was the honorary citizen of the town of Ravenna. And here the Italian culture is represented by Ginny Toschi Marazzani Visconti, a journalist and a public figure. Welcome to the stage.
Good afternoon. I'm particularly happy to be here, I must say, because I wouldn't have missed the 100th anniversary of Alexander Zinoviev. I remember when I met him, it was 35 years ago? Yes, 35 years ago. And he was in Milan, and he was going to publish the Catastroika. And I found he was incredible. Because, you know, he was somebody who was in love with his country, but he was criticizing the government. And at that time, I couldn't understand it. But he changed my way of living in a way because, you know, my approach to politics has been totally different. And I owe it to Alexander Zinoviev. I'm also particularly grateful to Olga for this invitation, an invitation sent to me in a very difficult and complicated period, an invitation that takes on a very important value, an invitation charged with responsibility to me because I feel that I also represent hundreds of thousands of people in my country who are for peace, against war, against gas war, against war through EU intermediaries, against sanctions ruining relations among countries, against nations all belonging to Europe in terms of history, culture, and tradition. Russia is part of Europe, absolutely. I would also mention somebody else here because I'm sure he would have loved to be here with us, and that is Giulietto Chiesa. Giulietto Chiesa died in 2020, a few hours after speaking in favor of Julian Assange during an online international conference that our group, No War, No NATO Committee, had organized to awaken public attention to the risks of NATO. We foresaw that was about to happen and tried to reason with a public paralyzed by disinformation concentrated on COVID-19. Anyway, today people are realizing that NATO is a danger, and this is very important. And more people are realizing that in Europe, absolutely. I'm talking about my country. And people are not satisfied, are really more than afraid of what's going to happen. And they don't understand why. No, we have to be on the side of United States playing their game in Europe. We don't know. We don't understand. Anyway, you know, I have often thought about Alexander, how Alexander would comment on the current situation. I confess that this that his critical thinking towards power, whatever it was, spurred me to fight and encouraged many others to react against a single thought that seemed unescapable. The epidemic before and this absurd war that was earlier drawn up by Rand Corporation in 2009. Our common desire is for all of this to come to an end as soon as possible, before someone makes an irreparable mistake here in Europe, in the heart of our common history and culture. Спасибо.
Благодарим вас.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for your pitch and for the fact that you managed to arrive. Another messenger from China and a big friend of Zinoviev community is Ms. Van Sulin, a very modest lady, and it's very difficult to say that she is a director of Tianjin Russian-Chinese Center of Culture and Art, but in essence she's an artist who has the status of an outstanding actor of the national art. She is a member of the Board of Association of the Fine Art Actors of China, Deputy Chair of the International Scientific Society of Calligraphy and Fine Art. Esteemed Van Sulin, welcome to the stage. Over to you. "100 years to Alexander Zinoviev." Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank Olga Mironovna for her kind invitation. Thank you so much. Today, we all are celebrating and remembering outstanding philosopher, social scientist, political scientist, founder of rethinking of our communist and socialist past. 100 years since the birth of outstanding philosopher Alexander Zinoviev. Today we are remembering great philosopher who throughout his life, all his intelligence dedicated to the analysis of the modern state, and who wrote more than 40 books, out of which we remember such ones as Communism as Reality, as the Westernism, where he analyzes the relations between the Soviet Union, Russia and the West. Here we see a deep analysis of the social phenomena and international relations, in what circumstance that mankind does exist, and this is a big contribution to the social ideas, to the philosophical ideas of our century. Alexander Zinoviev loved his motherland, loved mankind, loved the world, and we clearly see that in his novels. President Putin appreciated his merits, and Zinoviev's scientific legacy is being used and serves as the basis of the political course taken by Russia. I'd like to extend my gratitude to Alexander Zinoviev for his scientific legacy, for his contribution that he left to our culture and to the whole mankind. On behalf of the Russian-Chinese Center of Culture, to wish every success to that event. I wish long history to our friendship between Russia and China. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Today with us is a well-known politologist. We know him as a blogger and permanent participant in various programs on the Russian TV, Mr. Markov. He has a long-term partnership ties with Zinoviev Club. Welcome, and over to you. Good afternoon, dear friends. I'm glad to be in that room today with you, to see the faces of friends. Thank you so much. Olga, thank you for a big work in organizing such events. I believe that the centenary of Zinoviev is a real festivity for us. And this is a result of our work, of your work, the work done by Dmitry Kiselev from Russiya Segodnya agency that offers us this platform. I was happy when I heard that President Putin said these words. This is a result of certain work which was done throughout the last 16 years, and you did a lot before that as well. Let me say a few words about what work can be done by us in future. Us, I mean the Zinoviev Club, and what we can do proceeding from what President Putin said. The fact that President Putin put Zinoviev on the top 100 figures helps us to move forward and strengthen his role in the Russian intellectual life in the years to come. Philosopher's life, I believe, goes in 3 dimensions. First of all, when his texts would be read, and I mean Zinoviev, not only him, it might be Kant, it might be Nietzsche and others, when people would thoroughly read his texts and would find thousands smart ideas about hundreds of different problems. This is right and this is very good, and this is what we have to do, but for that we have to read texts. But how we can help that process? There is a very simple way. We have to make sure that Alexander Zinoviev is included into the syllabus of the Ministry of Education, that he's introduced into the Faculty of Philosophy. People are good there, and I do think that altogether we can make sure it has been done. But not only the Faculty of Philosophy has to include his works into the syllabus. Students of other trades also have to learn about him. They will not read immediately his books, but not necessarily they will do that overnight. They would think about thousands of other things, but once they are familiar with his name, you know that becoming more grown up, people get back to what they learned in their childhood, and they would be reading these texts. And I do believe that some mentioning of Mr. Zinoviev can be done in the school program as well. This is number one. Second, and the third dimensions of philosopher's life is about a philosopher coming up with some interesting meanings, that he invests in the notions that are well known to everyone. For instance, Superman by Nietzsche, negation of a negation from Hegel. So some philosophers would have a couple of phrases that are well known, and we, as heirs to Zinoviev, have to come up with a couple of the phrases which would be associated with Zinoviev. It was not Nietzsche who actually made these coinages, who popularized that. Nietzsche, for instance, did not do that on his own. Usually, these would be dozens of people who are more familiar with that philosophy, then it would spill over to 1,000 other people, then to 100,000, etc., etc. These are my main ideas. What Zinoviev can be associated with, what another philosopher can be associated with, what couple of phrases are most typical of him. Moreover, I believe that we have to make such a philosophical experiment. We can outline the main ideas, 1 page long, just like usually it's been done at schools. Then we can actually make 3 pages long outlining of these ideas, like for humanitarian departments, then 10 pages long, as is pertinent to the faculties of philosophy in universities. And it would mean giving an opportunity to the society to get familiar with or become aware of Zinoviev's ideas. And usually people would say, please explain to us. So it means that this is what we have to do. This is the second dimension. When you propose several categories, thus contributing to the physical ideas of the mankind, these categories should be about superpower or super society or something like that, or Homo Sovieticus, for instance, or yawning heights. This is not just a sense of humor, this is a very good category. This is the second dimension. This is what we have to come up with. And the third dimension is opening up some new reality by these philosophers. And probably this is not just about a discovery, and people would guess that there is such a discovery, but the philosopher would come up with such a reality and say, let us discuss that reality. For instance, the philosopher can offer certain laws related to this reality, and you have to deal with that reality. You cannot avoid that. And getting back to the philosophers that I've mentioned, Nietzsche at the time said, the new reality is about the people who are denying humanitarian values of their society and claim the role for possessing some superpower. That was the idea of a Superman by Nietzsche. No one is negating morality or anything like that. Hegel, for instance, said, you'll know that there are some contradictions, and he said, no, this is not that there are contradictions in the world or controversies, but rather there are several mechanisms, negation of negation, etc. So there are several mechanisms typical of such development. Zinoviev, what we can do about him? I believe that Zinoviev is very relevant in his dimension. He is a philosopher of the Soviet civilization. He tried to comprehend the Soviet reality when he was advocate, and he denied the Soviet ideas in his Yawning Heights. Then, when the West and we too said that this is not the pinnacle of the civilization, this is not the optimal way for the development, this is an impasse, and we have to deny it and forget about that. And he said, no, wait a minute. Soviet civilization takes a very important place there, and right now we have to try to comprehend that, to comprehend the place of the Soviet civilization in that concert of civilization development of the world. Why it is so important for us now? For 25 years we said we don't need any uniqueness, let us copy and paste what originates from the West, but you cannot do that. The West is different. It is not as ugly and aggressive. We cannot follow that model, but then what our model would be about? And again, in order to understand it, we have to continue what we used to have. Including we have to go on with the Soviet Empire, with the Soviet Empire. And to do that, we have to contemplate on that, to comprehend that as a society. We cannot even analyze this stage of our Soviet civilization. We close that as if there are no works dedicated to the Soviet civilization. Nothing has been created about that. But I believe that this is a task put forward by the Soviet people. It was not a dead impasse, but not something we have to get back to. So let us analyze and to conclude what we may replicate from that, what lessons we can learn. This is one of the most significant tasks which are put forward in front of the intellectual society. And it will prolong the philosophical legacy of Mr. Zinoviev, and this is what is demanded for by our society. Philosophers enjoy grants and would be given rooms for presentations and place in journals when they serve for the interests of their societies. We, as people in between the West, this Russian identity and Soviet heritage and civilization, how we define our model for the development. The society needs that badly. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this optimism. You may be aware, due to a number of reasons, the sky of many European countries is closed for Russian airlines, but our hearts are not closed for people who could still come to Moscow in this complicated international situation to join us here in this auditorium. Member of the Coordination Committee of Russian Compatriots in France, founder of the Urals France Association, an expert in the Slavic culture, a person with a huge Russian soul and Russian passport. Please welcome Dmitry Dikoshko. You get the floor as part of Zinoviev Readings of 2022. Good afternoon. First of all, thank you for this invitation. It's a very important moment for me. I used to be friends with Alexander Zinoviev for about 50 years, not 100 years. I hope we will continue to remember him for the next, I don't know, 1,000 years or almost as long. Alexander Zinoviev's ideas are still highly relevant today. We mentioned how he was full of paradoxes. When I met him in the 1970s, even before he was exiled, back then I taught French in the Moscow State University. We visited Zinoviev. It was not welcome back then, and we had lengthy debates with him. He thought that communism and socialism were sources of his hopes for the future as well as his disappointment. He believed that the Soviet reality was communism, with all its paradoxes and with all its terrible features. Let's not hide it today. We believed that those terrible aspects had nothing to do with socialism. There was actually a group of young Frenchmen back then, or someone who were real Frenchmen and others were just teaching French. And back then, it was the year of 1968 in France. That year gave us hope. Now it's, I feel and I understand how naive it was. Back then we believed in socialism, in true socialism, not the one that was that existed in the USSR and represented by the Communist Party. We had hopes for that kind of socialism, and Alexander Zinoviev would also comfort us. And most importantly, he explained to us how systems work, how bureaucracies work, how they are strong and viable by themselves. He was describing what we today call the deep state. The Soviet reality was much like a caricature, and Zinoviev has this satirical talent, and connecting him with Saltykov-Shchedrin, the satirical writer of the 19th century. And when we spoke with him, we also recalled Saltykov-Shchedrin. What was presented as anti-communism in the West was actually anti-Russian sentiments. And he said back then, you were targeting communism and you hit Russia. And why Zinoviev's ideas are so relevant today? It's mostly about sociology and how systems operated, and it really helped me in my personal life and in my professional life in understanding what was required And what we had to agree with, Zinoviev might have been disappointed, and of course he wanted to live better than what he had in his life, but he refused to focus on a career, on bowing to the authorities, and he was faithful to his principles and to his ethics, and he infected us with that kind of attitude, thankfully, even though it complicates one's life, I can assure you. He had an excellent understanding of the Soviet system, but when he ended up in the West, he quickly revealed and discovered the reality that we were telling him about, and he was skeptical back then about our thoughts, as many Soviet citizens today. When we kept saying, wait a minute, the West is not the paradise on earth, we don't have milky rivers here or stones of gold, they looked at us with suspicion. They were saying, oh, you live in the Soviet Union, then you'll see. We tried to explain the reality of the West, even though we often failed. But when Zinoviev moved to the West, he remained the same person with the same principles, just as capable of analysis and understanding how systems worked. He also naturally explained how the Western system worked, and that led to disappointment of many people who promised him a lot, and that was something that he refused eventually, that he abandoned eventually. That's also relevant today. Many, at least there are Russians whom we meet in the West, especially young guys, who are still infected with this inferiority complex of those colonized by the West, this Westernism that Zinoviev wrote about, and something that he felt in his real life. And they don't always recognize, even if they lived in another country for a long time, they don't always recognize that the system was different from what they thought. But Zinoviev was able to admit that and recognize that. He was not the only person who did that, but he did it at his high level. And today, and we understand it even better today, what we criticized, what we criticized in the Soviet Union, now all that is in the West, and vice versa. In Russia, you get much more freedom and openness, even though following the West also hurts the education in Russia, but not as much as in the West. It's your sense of history, as your sense of sovereignty for you and your country, your own identity, which is denied sometimes in our Western countries. Zinoviev never thought of himself as a dissident. He often corrected Western journalists who called him a dissident. this one mathematician gave me one of the first books by Zinoviev. It was a simply printed book called The Logic. He gave it to me. He said, "You wouldn't understand it anyway. That's the only book that I have." Well, of course, he wrote the end of an illusion, and he said there that I hope that many Russians will also understand that, especially if they are still under Westernism. Principles are also very important, and he explained it by saying we cannot do it differently, but that's actually how it happened. Perhaps it's the personal thing, but we used to argue, and even around that particular book, which I did not. That book actually had this inscription from him, for you to remember our debates in Moscow. But then we got closer to one another. Each one of us had our own truths, even regarding socialism. Socialism remains a hope for many people all over the world. But you need to think about it, to figure out the main principles of how we should be living, including Russia. You need to reject this reward if it is offered to you to say something against your conscience. His tombstone says that he was a citizen, and we discussed citizenship. We come from the French society, where citizenship is a serious thing, and it is true, citizenship is particularly important for the society of today. What do we want to be? And of course it clashes with this idea of Westernism. Do we want to be citizens? It means, if you are a citizen, it means that you impact the choice of your country, the course of your country in the cultural and other senses. But this is what is being destroyed in the West as well. Even though our society was founded on your rights and on what we call civil society or civic society, this notion is of little importance now in the West, but we should not just be consumers, as globalism demands from us, and this global state, which already turned many countries into societies of consumers. They think that they have rights because they can go to court. But not all people can go to court because they have no money. This is not the only foundation of relations between people when you just go to court. This super society that pulls us to globalism, that wants to enslave us and make us consumers only, and they cannot allow other countries to develop. Even those countries spent decades in poverty. Look at the US military budget on supporting their empire. If we did not spend all this money, we could have dealt with hunger and starvation. Now they are imposing on us this green agenda, this lie, environmental lie, and these are dogmas that you are not allowed to contradict, that you are not allowed to argue with. The goal is to deprive the third world countries of their energy and their opportunity to develop and grow. Yes, here Zinoviev's ideas are also particularly relevant, his ideas about super society and this hegemony. He felt that, and he described that. Even when he spoke about Yugoslavia. And this is what Western Europe is going through. Those military activities that are going on in Ukraine right now again, this is cannibalism of Western Europe and an obstacle to the development of other countries. These are some of my thoughts about the relevance of Zinoviev today. Thank you, Dmitry. All right. Here in the room, we have an expert in Russian literature who specialized in Rozanov, Dostoevsky, and Zinoviev, historian of literature and the employee of the Russian Literature Museum named after Vladimir Dal, head of Moscow's Dostoevsky House and author of the first biography of Alexander Zinoviev, distinguished Pavel Fokin.
Good afternoon. For me, it's a privilege to speak in front of such an august meeting on such a hallmark occasion. And certainly we waited for that for quite a while. There were lots of concerns. We tried to make sure that the ideas of Mr. Zinoviev translate not only into words but into some visual images. And big work was done by making an exhibition dedicated to Mr. Zinoviev. And such exhibitions were held in multiple cities of Russia, city of Irkutsk and Irkutsk region, Ryazan, Kostroma. And we are preparing the Dal Museum, an exhibition which will be opened on November the 3rd in the Moscow Dostoevsky Museum, and if you have time I will be ready to welcome you there. But apart from that information, I would like to say a few words on some acute problems and issues which were raised today. Friends, lots of ideas occurred to me once I listened to all of you. First of all, probably, let me pick it up from what was said by Dmitry Dekashko. I'm referring to Russia and West in the modern context, because for Zinoviev it was a very important task, a very important topic. One of his first collection of articles published in Europe was called We and the West. And this topic, We and the West, remained relevant for Zinoviev until his last days. One of his latest publications in Literatурная Gazeta in March 2006, several months before his demise. I don't remember exactly the name, but he was speaking about what we're losing. The whole article was dedicated to an outcry defending the European civilization. It's another paradox. Zinoviev, a patriot of Russia, he was a citizen of Europe. And thank you, Ms. Visconti, for saying that Russia is part of Europe. This is really true. Russia is Europe. And we learned a lot from Europe. We have become a Russian civilization only because we interacted with Europe. But at the same time, Europe has what Zinoviev dubbed as a Westernism phenomenon. This is one of the major discoveries made by Zinoviev, something that we have to comprehend, and that's this very Westernism phenomenon. We have to differentiate that from the Western culture. This is Europe and the European culture that gave birth to great ethical teachings. We owe to Europe the nascence of humanism, which transformed the very outlook of mankind. But in the context of post-Cold War period, when new phenomena came afore based on the rules and the practices, the laws that were proposed at a time for some specific purposes in Europe, when forces started rearing their heads that were hurdled by these very ideas, the idea of humanism. The very idea of humanism became a barrier for them, a hurdle for them. And this is when they started this active war that we witnessed over the last several decades. With great surprise, with our eyes wide open, we saw these ideas related to parent number one, parent number two, different genders, Green Deal, and other things. This list is not complete. I can draw a lot of other cases of this attack staged by Westernism, which has become a specific phenomena, a collective West, a specific social phenomena. And it decided to attack the European values, including the European culture. This attempt today, and this is not widespread, this is not total, but at least this is being spelled out by different political bureaucrats. The idea to give up the Russian culture, to detach the Russian culture from the European one. That's an aggression against the culture in general, including the European one. Russia today has to stand up to protect the Russian culture and the European culture at the same time. This is our mission. We have to treat with a lot of caution that unique cultural phenomena, a union between the West and Russia, which was licked into the shape throughout centuries. We have to protect that. We cannot put a barrier. We cannot follow the provocators who want to ruin this our legacy, that civilization. And the second aspect, for me, as a person who, in the very beginning of his career, dedicated 10 years to lecturing, to teaching, I value very much what the Minister of Education said today, and what Sergei Markov said, that really Zinoviev has to be taught at schools and universities. Zinoviev is a philosopher who, apart from his depth and significance, he is very open to his readers. Unlike many classical philosophers and modern philosophers, Zinoviev is very democratic in his ideas. He always wanted to be understood. Therefore, he was very clear in his ideas. He didn't like to be fooled with different terms and different structures. And I believe that he was proponent, an advocate of the common sense. Common sense is always clear. And therefore we have to update his ideas. And this has to be done at school and at universities. This is not a question. And in essence, that is more difficult than that, because such decisions alone will not help. The humanitarian programs that we see are not aimed at the development of ideas. They are aimed at anything but that, such as drilling, remembering things, but these programs are not aimed at the development. But all in all, that's a very conservative thing and a very rigid educational structure. And Zinoviev cannot make up with that. There is no place for Zinoviev in such a system. Really, we have to take a very specific way, and I'm very grateful to you as to what Zinoviev Club has to do when elaborating some very important techniques to promote, to advance Zinoviev's thoughts in the educational syllabus. Thank you so much, and this concludes my remarks. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. One more pitch in the framework of Zinoviev reading in the first part of our plenary session and conference. In 1995, being blessed by Patriarch Alexei II, International Spiritual Unity of Peoples was set up. It is presided by Valery Alexeyev, such a public civil society and church collaboration acts as an example of the public diplomacy, contributes greatly to supporting the authority of the Russian Orthodox Church and strengthening of the Russian Orthodox moral values and family values. Welcome. Dear Olga, dear participants in our today's Hallmark event, let me also, just as a doctor and professor and a person close to Zinoviev, at least because we used to study at the same faculty of philosophy at the Moscow State University. I also was a professor there. I'd like to take advantage of this opportunity and say a few words as a scientist, as a philosopher, to elaborate on the ideas that were proposed by Mr. Zinoviev for many years, which have become breakthrough for the Soviet philosophy. Bear in mind the shortage of time. I see that we have to make a break because everyone would like to have a say, but the time is short. Therefore, let me be very laconic. Let me highlight one problem only. Alexander Zinoviev, whose centenary we are celebrating today, left his legacy as a methodological tool. And today it's been already mentioned to continue the great battle on the stage of a global war. And this global clash of ideas becomes more and more acute and more fateful. And really it is opening up yawning heights to us that bring us to the last limit, beyond which you see catastrophism and the doomsday. Mr. Zinoviev paid a lot of attention to such relevant topic as theory and practice of elites. He started with a critical analysis of the Soviet elites, but then he started studying the Western elites as well. How strange it may appear, he found a lot in common between the Soviet and bourgeois elites, which are marked with the aspiration to strengthen their rule over the people, who was subordinated to them by means of different spin doctor and electoral mechanisms or party and bureaucratic manipulations. Alexander Zinoviev, living in the Soviet Union and then in the West, had to face the peculiarities of the elites in their decaying and declining period, when they failed to live up to the people's aspiration and thus contributed to the degradation of their societies. The ideas poverty of elites, when they remained in silos of an estate nature, became one of the reasons for such a decay, and has been showcased by an example of the post-Soviet elites, which claim the role of intelligentsia. The post-Soviet elite history, this is when they betrayed the interests of the common people, when they gave up their mission to be the leading and creative power in the society. Unfortunately, the experience of masses shows that elitarity, this is not a complementary ability. And the elites do not have to be detached from the people, but they have to serve to the interests of the motherland, to the people, getting necessary skills and knowledge to help the nation achieve goals, attain goals in spiritual and material life, and providing for the necessary security. This is why Russia needs badly such a new elite, such an attacking class, which, being systemically prepared for that, has, for the sake of the motherland, get rid of the traitors who stay at the steering wheel of the nation, comprehending the philosophical legacy of Zinoviev, who, being a patriot, left us with great heritage. The elites should delegate to the new positions the ones who are not bound with the ties of nepotism and are ready to serve for the interests of their people. Thank you. That's a very interesting presentation, something that we're going to publish on the website of the foundation. Thank you. Friends, from one reading to another reading, we expand the confidence circle. This year, it was joined by another unique person who we take pride in. That's a legend in the public security and intelligence. This is an apprentice of, student of Zinoviev, who taught him logics at school near Lubyanka. Oleg Nichiporenko. Thank you so much for your tip. Esteemed friends, as far as world of friends, and we have gathered on the occasion of that date, on the one hand, that's a very serious thing, but on the other hand, it's a very mournful occasion. I would like to make my proposition, whatever I heard today, being present in that event, I think, could be collected, and we probably have to set up a kind of a team to process all these materials and to come up with a kind of a textbook, a manual, a guide on Zinoviev philosophy or teachings. A lot's been said, and we can agree with lots of things, and some of the things that would require certain discussion. This is my proposition. As concerns my wish to share with you, this year is very interesting for me. It happens so that this date coincided with the fact that this very year we have a 10 years gap.
I met Alexander Zinoviev for the first time in 1952. You mentioned a lot of facts about Zinoviev. Let me share with you my story. There were some photos shown on TVs where I speak to Olga Mironovna, and I was telling her how we interacted with Alexander Zinoviev. And those were really fateful stages of my relations with them. And there were 6 such periods of my contacts with Zinoviev. In 1952, our school director, named Chichvarin, brought a young kid into the classroom. He was wearing the old military uniform and high boots, and this guy was introduced as a teacher of the new discipline for the 10th graders, logic. They brought him in as a teacher of logic, and he was a postgraduate of the philosophy department at the Moscow State University. That was his part-time job that he took. This new teacher walked in, and most of us were children of war. We were too old for that grade level. Many of us went through occupation and some war fighting, but when he began talking to us, when he explained to us his subject, this was a revelation to us, even though in the 9th grade we also took a course of psychology. And before that, we had a postgraduate student who taught us psychology again, and she had a pair of skates in her briefcase, and that's another fact that I can remember. Anyway, immediately after Alexander Zinoviev left, we immediately saw the difference between Zinoviev and other teachers we had. Those other teachers were pretty good. They were experienced and old school, but this new teacher, Alexander Zinoviev, was speaking the same language, even though the difference between us was 10 years. We almost considered him as our friend. We gave him a nickname. Let me tell you, the nickname that we gave him, Sashka, that's a diminutive form of Alexander. We felt that he was very close to us, regardless of the disciplines he was supposed to teach. And that's when we started, then he started his teaching career. That was just the first stage. The second stage and during the second stage, we were close again. We started discussing theory and high-level matters when I graduated from high school, and when I attended the university. We continued meeting and discussing things. There was another person there named Igor, and the three of us would visit each other, would be drinking tea and talking about things. We exchange our views on the situation around us. When I graduated from the university, they remained the scholars, and I began to work for the KGB, for the state security. This badge that I have now is to celebrate the 40th anniversary of that organization. Anyway, we went in different directions. I was dealing with other matters, and sometimes I met this other guy named Igor, and he would tell me things about Alexander Zinoviev. But we did not see each other all that much. Alexander and I. Then I was working in the intelligence departments and counterintelligence. I was working on matters that were related to penetrating foreign intelligence services and dealing with dialogical subversions. I went to a bunch of foreign countries. It was then when the Yawning Heights were published. This was a revelation to me. I still remembered our professor, our teacher, who was so loyal to our worldviews. All of a sudden, he was writing about things that we could not believe. The so-called fifth department of the KGB dealt with him. They were responsible for ideology, and they were focusing on what we called dissidents, even though they didn't consider Zinoviev in particular a dissident. When Zinoviev had to leave for the West, and when he stayed there, the materials about the life of Zinoviev, Alexander and Olga Zinovievs, and how they lived in the West, they ended up in that particular department that focused on ideology. In my safe in my office, I got a file. I kept a file about Alexander Zinoviev, and this was information coming from those countries where Zinoviev went in the West. I had it in my own safe box, in my own office, and then I went to other countries. I traveled between different continents, and I was no longer connected with that ideology situation. Then I got back, and now destinies crossed paths again when I learned that in a paradoxical manner Zinoviev began to criticize the Western principles, and when he returned in 1999, after a while, I gave him a phone call. He accepted my invitation to meet, and I visited him at his house. I met Olga Mironovna, and we began to recall those years when we were in that school number 276 together, as a student and as a teacher, respectively. And he could still remember my classmates that I had long forgotten. He remembered all their names. He still remembered them. He remembered what they were like, describing them in great detail. This was amazing to me. And then that was a really warm meeting together. I went back to my office, and I was speaking at this meeting of intelligence service intelligence service veterans, and I went and I invited him to talk to this association of retired intelligence specialists. And I organized this meeting. He came to visit us, and he brought his books. This was a truly warm meeting, and we had photos made. And Olga Zinovieva still has those photos. He signed some of his books, and we did not meet for a while. And this was the 6th period of our friendship. I think it makes sense to follow my offer. This person gave me a chance to use his ideas for my personal development. He taught me the principles of analysis and using associations in everyday work. It really helped me a lot. I was always thankful to him, grateful to him as my teacher. And I always remembered how he helped me in my career using his knowledge and skills. Thank you. This was a great presentation. We are running out of time. We need to finish part 1 of the Zinoviev readings. We will continue after discussions, after a coffee break. let's take a 15 to 20 minute coffee break.